Okay, everyone. Hello once again. I guess we can start. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It's the third Thursday of March, and that's a time to have the second webinar of the CEP online series today on the topic of violent extremism. My name is Mirka Jakishova, and I work as a CEP policy officer. And today with me, I have my colleague, CEP policy officer, Mrs. Anna Esquerra-Roqueta, and my colleague from CEP office, Mrs. Marie Klaassen. And of course, we have our dear guests with us, Cuma and Sophie from the Violence Prevention Network. We are excited to welcome you here and happy that you made time this afternoon to join us for this short session. For this webinar, we had more than 80 participants registered, not only from across Europe, but also from across the world. From what I can see, we have the lower number of participants, but of course, as always, this webinar is being recorded. So if you cannot stay for the entire time of the webinar, or those who could not attend the webinar can then find the webinar recording on the CEP YouTube channel. At this moment, you can already find there the first session that was on the topic of alternatives to detention, namely the women's problem-solving court sentence as an alternative to custody that was delivered by Mrs. Fiona Deacon from His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service in January 2025. To start with, first, some house rules to mention. We would like to ask you or ask those participants who do not have their full names on their displays to change it and use their full names. You are, of course, welcome to ask your questions via a dedicated Q&A tool that you can find at the bottom navigation panel, or you can basically use chat if you wish to ask your question. This question will be addressed can be addressed during the presentation, and we will address them afterwards. Or after the presentation, you can use the raise your hand tool and ask your question directly to our speakers. I keep saying questions, but of course we welcome not only questions, but we are happy to learn your experience, practice, to hear your comments, thoughts, and opinions. About our second webinar, as said, the topic is violent extremism, and the presentation we will listen to today is titled Between Religion and Extremism, Strategies for Working with Radicalized Individuals. The presentation will be delivered by Cuma Ülger from the Violence Prevention Network. And I'm happy also to welcome here Sophie Schäuble from the same organization. About our speaker, about Cuma, his background is with Islamic studies, Jewish Christian religious studies, and pedagogy. Currently, he is the head of Justice Domain and former head of Advice Center Hesse at Violence Prevention Network in Hesse, Germany. He is a former lecturer at social work departments of various German universities. For many years, he worked with prisoners in Hessian prisons, supported rehabilitation and reintegration processes for extremist offenders, and work with individuals at risk of radicalization. A central part of his work focuses on returnees from war zones and supporting them in leaving extremist scenes. Welcome, Cuma and Sophie. We are happy to have you with us here. Thank you for agreeing to being with us today. And as I can see, with no further delay, the floor is yours, and we can start the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the Confederation of European Probation for the opportunity to speak today about strategies for working with radicalized individuals. I am happy to give you a couple of insights into my work with extremist offenders and with individuals at risk of radicalization today. Violence Prevention Network is focusing on preventing of extremism, intervention, disengagement, and distancing work. We started our work more than 20 years ago with right-wing extremism offenders in prison as the first civil society organization in Germany that did this work within prison settings. Since then, our organization grew and we currently have 150 staff members. We closely cooperate with our in-house research department to constantly develop and evaluate our methods and approaches in practice. I have been working for Violence Prevention Network since July 2014, and my work is directed at returned foreign terrorist fighters or with people in the general phenomenon of religiously motivated extremism. Overall, in our work, we aim for people who are susceptible to radicalization and perpetrators of violent crimes with extremist motivations, to be enabled to lead an independent life and to become and feel like a part of democratic society in order to preempt and prevent extremism. Our activities in the justice sector include the implementation of a training on anti-violence and education of responsibility in the form of group training programs and individual counseling. We also have regular exchange meetings with prison and probation services. The measures also include joint sports activities with our target group in prison, as well as support and counseling for the clients, social environment, and loved ones. Courts, juvenile court assistance, child and youth welfare services, and probation services also contact us with requests for the support and counseling for radicalized individuals outside of prison. In cases of a probation order, we decide in consultation with the courts, the probation officers, and the relevant specialist services how comprehensively the respective case should be accompanied. The methods and content of our approach depend on the degree of radicalization. The counseling and individual training sessions take place at regular intervals. The frequency of the meetings is needs-orientated. For example, they can take place 3 times a week, but also weekly or bi-weekly for 2-3 hours at a time. As mentioned before, the care, consultation, disengagement support, and of the cases we work with occurs in prison as well as outside of prison. Our work is more resource-oriented and systemic in the sense that we always try to include the social environment, family, teachers, etc. of our clients. We always try to focus on the individual needs of our clients. This can mean trying to work towards autonomy, give them a greater sense of spiritual safety and interpersonal connections. I will explain this in more detail on the following slides. An important principle in working with this target group is voluntariness, which is not a given for many of our clients with a probation order. This leads to the question on how to help people who have little intrinsic motivation to seek support and counseling. In such cases, the probation order means that contact with us is coercive. However, we have found that despite the coercive context, trust builds up over the course of the conversations, so that this coercive attitude does not necessarily have a continue as a consequence of future cooperation. So even if the motivation is initially extrinsic, we have found that it changes to intrinsic after a few conversations. In the course of our counseling, we often experience the transformation process. In general, when meeting with a client, it is important to provide a space of comfort. In doing so, as practitioners and social workers, we should turn one's attention to the needs of the client. This space could, for example, be a cafe, a kebab store, a room of silence, a mosque, the apartment of the parents, or a sports complex. We know from the field of room pedagogy that rooms have huge effects on a person. Rooms trigger feelings, emotions, inspirations, and thoughts. In this context, I would like to give an example from my experience. Throughout my presentation, I will refer to one of my clients, Kevin, a male returnee from the former territories of the so-called Islamic State. I used to work with him for several years. In counseling settings, when my client, the returnee Kevin, had the need to take off his shoes and pray in a clean room, then it is important to be able to accommodate him with these requests. We have a room of silence in our counseling center. This room is comfortable and with an oriental atmosphere, equipped with a carpet, seat cushions, and aesthetic elements. As I said, rooms can create a sense of well-being and safety and help clients to overcome inner resistance regarding certain topics. We have also noticed this with Kevin. Physical comfort and identification features create a sense of nearness and facilitate trust building. When I offer not only water but also Turkish tea or mocha to the returnee to drink, this creates a pleasant atmosphere and facilitates the access to him. Likewise, when I offer them the option to pray in the prayer room. Unfortunately, in most penal institutions that I am active in, not much importance is attached to this, which makes access to this target group more difficult. It is not easy to have productive conversations in bleak and cold rooms or with a glass partition, especially given that in the conversations we have with clients, intimate as well as confidential matters are addressed. The topics include life crisis, loss of control, the offense the person is convicted of, the motivation tied to the offense, ideology, experiences of violence, and the biographical origin or motives for hate and violence. These conversations are an essential component of the work with our clients. It is important to note that within this engagement and distancing work in the field of religiously motivated or supposedly religiously motivated extremism, we are in contact with diverse groups of people. These may include migrants, refugees, or others who identify as religious, people with different cultural backgrounds. Ignorance of the appearance and characteristics of these groups can lead to reservations, prejudices, and mistrust. In particular, equating a dominant religious identity or strong religiosity with extremism or Islamism can lead to stigmatization and have drastic consequences. It is therefore necessary to take a differentiated view of case constellations in social practice and this sensitive subject area. Certain codes like brother or salam alaikum and the display of identification features like my Muslim identity or my education in Islamic studies enable me to build a sense of closeness to many of our clients. In the case of Kevin, it provided a relationship of trust and gave him the impression that I can empathize with him and understand on a comprehensive level what he is going through. We often hear from our clients that they have never in their lives been approached on eye level like this. However, apart from identification factors, our disengagement and distancing work includes educational work, during which dialogues concerning difficult questions are led, but also the social work educational perspective, which looks at the problems of the client. This is why it is important for us to possess geopolitical, theoretical, psychological, as well as theological knowledge and expertise, as well as social work skills. I want to give you another example of our demand-driven counseling and conversation. When Kevin signals to me deep interest to talk about religious questions, such as, I have broken the oath of loyalty, I turned my back on Daesh, thereby I committed a sin, right? And now I'm a traitor whom God will never forgive, right? Then it is important to take this seriously, to respond to this need, and to talk about it theologically. We often experience that with target groups who are highly ideologized, theological discussions can provide a first access point. while to later stage, it is important to also bring up other topics related to democracy or the constitutional state. These are often not realistic topics for the very beginning of the process. If you want to speak in pictures or metaphors, you can imagine a house with 100 different windows, but all of them are closed except for one. So you will try to get access through that open window in order to also be able to hopefully open the other windows of the house. Therefore, taking religious questions seriously leads to a feeling of acceptance and maybe an entry point to other topics such as biography, experiences of discrimination, life crisis, etc. Only then does it become possible to work on underlying factors and causes of the individual radicalization processes. Oftentimes, such questions, like the ones asked by Kevin, are the triggers for a person's life crisis and shape the entire course of life, possibly leading to acts of self-harm or harm against others. Desperation, frustration, and the succession of negative experiences in life reinforces. In such a situation, the departure to a war zone can seem to be the last resort to flee from the biographical crisis in order to escape to an alleged dream world. Moreover, not meeting these needs and not meeting these needs in alternative social spaces like mosques, schools, or parental homes may hold a risk for young people to join extremist groups. Escaping this crisis situation, even if only temporarily, is consciously accepted as them smaller evil, even though most do realize that these groupings are not quite safe and are the wrong way. Undifferentiated approaches and generalized diagnosis and interventions harbor the risk of trivializing or stigmatizing the client. If a criminal offense is viewed as an excessively problematizing way, the victim's perspective as well as the suffering and psychological consequences of the injured party may predominate, which is important, but this entails the risk of the stigmatizing the client. For example, we see in practice that prisoners who have served her sentence changed and been rehabilitated, continue to be criminalized, defamed for years, or decades to come. A normalizing view of the case tends to focus on the offender's perspective and the corresponding social or biographical causes. This in turn entails the risk of trivializing or disregarding the suffering of the victim or the psychological consequences of the crime. Professionalism in this area of tension requires a differentiated and sensitive approach. This means that neither the victim's nor the offender's perspective must be ignored. In our day work, we observe that it is quite common for typical adolescent behavior to be assessed by the authorities in a security-laden or security-oriented manner. A classic example is that when pupils or prisoners make a problematic or vague statement in political education workshops, this is taken literally and thus overvalued. From a pedagogical perspective, it would be important in such constellation to consider the perspective, biography, living conditions, and socialization of the young people before jumping to conclusions. An Afghan or Palestinian young person who may have experienced war and flight or been traumatized and then makes a supposedly exaggerated statement should not be branded as extremist across the board. Being individually affected can be triggering and cause strong emotional arousal, which can lead to re-traumatization. As we all know, extremists offer support in dealing with the typical problems and challenges young people are facing. They offer a frame of reference and a support system that considers and satisfies the youth search for a deeper meaning, their need for religious knowledge, spirituality, and sense of community. Such young people haven't found a better space or way to overcome their crisis. Therefore, more alternative social spaces must be created for them. Spaces in which the desire for religiosity, spirituality, and community spirit are not ignored. Spaces in which young people with Muslim roots are not exposed to the pressure to justify themselves due to their identity. Spaces in which it is legitimate to have multiple identities, to be Muslim, multifaceted, heterogeneous, and European. Unfortunately, however, such spaces often do not exist or face stigma. The construction of new professional, public, or private network which would facilitate imposition of distance to extremist groupings currently falls short. Even though several mentoring programs exist, they don't manage integration the target group properly into the job market. An idea could be to be subsidized or financial deferment to make hearing these young people attractive to employers. As soon as a returnee submits his police clearance certificate during a job application, he is discarded. We know from many years of practice and research that social disintegration is a factor that can cause possible radicalization or re-radicalization. Hence, educational and professional integration measures tailored to this target group are existential. A statement or the behavior of a young person can be interpreted culturally, politically, theologically, or even extremist. When such incidents are reported to us by security authorities or external parties, it is important to have social pedagogical diagnostic tools to anamnesis, diagnosis, intervention, and evaluation in order to ensure professional social pedagogical action. This provides practitioners with a flexible diagnostic tool that guides them in a differentiated analysis of action and problem situations. This tool is indispensable in practice. In practice, it is used in particular as a tool for reflection that provides information on whether a chosen intervention strategy is professionally appropriate and justifiable and shows the limits and possibilities of professional action. Practitioners are thus aware of their professional role and can act in accordance with their own profession. Such instruments and methods of social pedagogical actions create an awareness of the need to act in a way that is orientated towards the real world on the one hand and not to fall into a helper syndrome on the other. In view of the fact that many other actors, such as the police, school, youth welfare office, school social work, relatives, imams, etc., are involved in such cases, it is important not to lose sight of the holistic or multi-perspective aspect and way to improve cross-institutional cooperation. Working with radicalized and extremist influenced young people is personal intensive and must be oriented towards a longer time period. Only financial stability of the NGOs and educational employees of such programs through the establishment of regulatory structures and a permanent safeguarding of their activities can guarantee sustainable disengagement and distancing work. To come back to Kevin, at the end of my presentation, Kevin was sentenced to several years of youth punishment for supporting a terrorist union. He is angry with himself for allowing himself to be seduced by extremist groupings. Nowadays, he reads a book every week and discusses it with me. Meanwhile, he says, education yourself protects you from these people. Kevin has shown a strong interest in regular meetings and has accepted professional help. The conversations have shown him that religion and politics are complicated and one must deal with them intensively. Today, he can understand that the extremist groupings spread an interpretation of religion that is abusive and based on easy answers. The talks with us have encouraged him to intellectually engage with his religion. He has developed independent thinking, can accept other perceptions without fear, and can again develop his own thoughts in order to make self-confident and independent decisions. Many thanks for your attention. Here are my contact details. Thank you.
Thank you, Cuma, for your presentation, for this very excellent and comprehensive presentation. I think that many of us who are there today will agree specifically on the holistic and multi-agency approaches that you mentioned, because with working with radicalized offenders, we cannot stay in the vacuum, and no one can work separately, no organization and families and other stakeholders must be involved, unless anyone has a question, and I can see that there is no question. I would ask you if you can tell us more on your cooperation with probation services, especially because I know that you provide probation services with specific trainings on the topic of violent extremism. So I would be curious if you can maybe elaborate more how these trainings, what it entails to undergo these trainings, how it works and stuff like that.
I will explain it shortly in German and my colleague Sophie will translate it. Also mit der Bewährungshilfe arbeiten wir natürlich sehr eng zusammen. Wir arbeiten auch mit den Richtern zusammen, weil die Richter geben ja die Bewährungsauflage auf. Vielleicht kannst du das erstmal übersetzen.
Yeah, so the work is not only limited to probation services, but also to the courts and the judges who are in charge of the probation conditions.
Ja, im Urteil wird dann erwähnt, beziehungsweise die Richter fragen uns vorher, in welchem Betreuungszyklus wir dann diesen Klienten betreuen können. Und das wird dann im Urteil quasi ja, mit vermerkt.
So oftentimes before the conviction, the judge asks us or reaches out to us in what type of cycle and in what type of intensity we can or would recommend working with a specific client, and then this is part of the probation conditions in the end.
Genau, also wir sind inzwischen bei den Gerichten sehr bekannt. Das hat viele Jahre gedauert, bis wir bekannt wurden. Und wenn natürlich ein Urteil steht und da ist auch eine Bewährungsauflage, dann kommt natürlich die Bewährungshilfe ins Spiel und die Bewährungshelfer.
Yeah, and of course, if that conviction concerns probation, then this is when probation officers or probation service, access or our paths cross in that sense.
Genau, mit der Bewährungshilfe haben wir dann auch erstmal regelmäßig Gespräche, wo wir dann berichten, wie die Bewährungsauflage läuft und wie gut die Gespräche laufen. Also auch da pflegen wir den Kontakt sehr eng.
So it is normally a very close exchange between the probation officers and us. We are regularly in exchange about how well, the probation conditions are kept, the development of specific clients, the topics that we discussed with them, the hindrances that we experience, and, try to merge the two perspectives from our side as, the counselors from civil society's perspective, as well as probation side.
Genau, und wie wir der Bewährungshilfe auch zum Beispiel Coachings oder Weiterbildungen machen, darauf kann ich auch noch mal gerne eingehen, wenn gewünscht ist. Genau, also das kann einmal sozusagen ein runder Tisch sein, wo ein Fall besprochen wird, ohne dass der Klient dabei ist.
So there are different shapes and forms in which we do trainings or workshops for probation services and probation officers. Number one would be a roundtable where we discuss a specific case, but without the client present at that table.
Genau, und dort wird dann anonymisiert, zum Beispiel, also wenn es datenschutzwidrig schwierig ist, anonymisiert, wird dann über den Fall gesprochen und wir haben als Externe die Möglichkeit zu coachen bei diesem Fall, fallbezogen.
So in case there are data protection issues, we are discussing a case in an anonymous manner, but in order, to make it practical, discuss it case related, but then, don't use the name. And then we give specific, advice or comments on, either signs of radicalization or signs of improvement when it comes to, the client's constituency.
Genau, diese Möglichkeit besteht natürlich auch telefonisch, dass Bewährungshelfer bei uns im Büro anrufen und jederzeit sich Rat einholen können zu speziellen Fallkonstellationen.
And we always have an open line of communication through our phone. Probation officers and probation services know that they can always call us and ask for advice if they have a question related to a specific case or case constellation.
Also als Beratungsstelle beraten wir quasi nicht nur unser Klientel, sondern wir beraten dann auch, sei es Gefängnispersonal, Bewährungshilfe und so weiter, also auch Fachkräfte.
Yeah, because our understanding is that our main target group is the clients and the individuals that we work with in prison and outside of prison, but we also do multiplier trainings for prison staff, probation services, and all other actors that are potentially part of that disengagement and distancing process.
Genau. Wenn gewünscht ist, kann ich auch noch mal zu den Fortbildungsinhalten was sagen, also welche Inhalte wir dort quasi vermitteln.
Yeah, the question is, should we also go into a little bit of depth on what type of specific modules we offer for probation services when we train them? I see, okay, a nod from Anna, so I think that's a yes.
Okay. Also generell ist eine Fortbildung in mehrere Module aufgebaut. Der Klassiker ist, dass wir immer mit einer interkulturellen Sensibilisierung beginnen.
So normally we start with an intercultural sensitive aspect, especially in this field. We also do training for probation officers where we have a larger focus on right-wing extremism, but in the context of religiously motivated extremism or Islamist extremism, we start with the aspect I've just mentioned.
Genau, dann geben wir ein Lagebild, also auch von den Sicherheitsbehörden. Wie ist die Szene derzeit aufgestellt? Wie ist die Szene derzeit organisiert, international, aber auch vor allem in Deutschland?
Yeah, then we're trying to give an introduction into specific extremist movements and ideological fragments that might be at play or that might be relevant for a specific case or for a specific, geographical context, so to say. We try to contextualize also the reports that are published by security authorities in Germany in all 16 federal states.
Genau, weitere Themen sind zum Beispiel Einstiegs- und Ausstiegsursachen aus der extremistischen Szene.
Another really important topic is factors that lead to radicalization or joining extremist groups, but also factors that facilitate or reinforce, so to say, disengagement and distancing processes, which can be a multitude, of course, but there are patterns that are recognizable, and we try to sensitize probation officers to that.
Genau, und die Fortbildung ist auch interaktiv, also jetzt nicht nur im Frontalvortrag. Wir vermitteln zum Beispiel auch, wie man so Gespräche führt, also Gesprächstechniken, Gesprächseinstiege und üben das dann auch gemeinsam.
So normally these trainings and workshops are very interactive. So we practice on how a conversation, can be led with someone where a probation officer might have a feeling, that somebody is on the verge of radicalizing or radicalizing or recidivism in general. And then we practice how to communication techniques, conversation techniques in order for probation officers to feel equipped in these type of scenarios.
Genau, ein Dauerbrenner ist auch nochmal die Unterschiede zwischen Islam und Islamismus aufzuzeigen, damit auch eine friedliche Religion hier nicht stigmatisiert wird.
Yeah, and it came across in Cuma's presentation already a little bit. We get a lot of requests regarding questions on, the differentiation between Islam and Islamism. And sometimes there's a lot of alert about things, that might still be in the realm of a peaceful Islam, but authorities or probation officer might be concerned that it might lead to, Islamist tendencies. And there we try to support them with being able to differentiate better.
Genau, weitere Punkte sind zum Beispiel Erkennungsmerkmale und Radikalisierungsverläufe, dass wir die aufzeigen.
Yeah, and then we try to illustrate sort of typical radicalization processes, even though they're super individual, but we try to showcase what we've learned over the past 20 years when it comes to the specific processes of radicalization.
Also auch da zeigen wir auf, dass es immer kontextbasierend ist. Ich will mal ein Beispiel geben. Zum Beispiel der Zeigefinger, der den Monotheismus symbolisiert. Den nutzen ja auch sehr viele Extremisten. Und es ist eben ein Symbol des Islams, was durch die Extremisten instrumentalisiert wurde.
Yeah, so if we're talking about, I don't know, signs and codes and things like that, Cuma just showed his index finger and said this was obviously harbored by extremist actors, but normally it symbolizes just unity. So in that sense, we're trying to raise
Genau, bei einer normalen Sozialisation eines muslimischen Kindes zum Beispiel ist das zum Beispiel ein Symbol, was man von klein an schon lernt. Und das darf man dann nicht verwechseln, nur weil die Extremisten das eingenommen haben. Und ein Muslim macht das zum Beispiel, dass man anhand dieses Symbols ihn zum Extremisten erklärt.
Yeah, so we try to explain the process of how, this specific symbol was used and misused by extremist and terrorist actors. But if, I don't know, a 16-year-old shows it somewhere, it does not mean necessarily that they are an extremist or a terrorist actor. And maybe we can quickly just say something about the success criteria of or how we try to evaluate also the trainings that we provide for probation officers, because one specific thing is that the confidence and competence to act in these type of scenarios, that we sort of broaden the competence of probation officers whenever possible, activate and professionalize. They're dealing with people who might be ideologized or who might be extremist. Also increase their level of independence in decision making and recognizing these different signals. but then also having that aspect of sustainability, that these trainings that we provide also serve as multiplier trainings, and then the probation officers we trained continue training or provide training to others in-house, so to say. But I'm noticing we're running out of time, so I don't want to.
Vielleicht sind noch weitere Fragen auch, ja.
Thank you. Do not leave us, because we have actually one question in Q&A chat and 2 colleagues raised their hands. So, Jean, the floor is yours.
Genau. Es ist ja das Thema Traumatisierung und ob ein frühzeitiges Eingreifen, genau, dass ein frühzeitiges Eingreifen vorhanden und wirksam ist, um künftiges kriminelles Verhalten zu verhindern. Ich würde sagen,
Sorry, am I on, or is it the question, the written question being answered?
You can ask your question.
Okay, because it's about something else than traumatization.
Genau, soll ich?
So I just wanted to know, in the violent prevention network, do you base your preventive work on any form of risk assessment?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can quickly answer to that. I mean, we do work with cases like with terrorist offenders or extremist offenders. So, I mean, naturally, we cooperate very closely with security authorities and rely on the risk assessment they are doing. Our approach is more social work focused and based on like the theories of social work and resilience assessment. So while this also takes the risks into account that a person might pose, to their environment, to themselves, it is more largely focused on their biographical needs, on their social needs, on any type of needs that they might have, and more resource focused than deficit oriented. However, we of course, especially for the clients that have committed extremist offenses before and that would be categorized as high-risk clients, we have specific security procedures in place, of course.
All right, thank you. Can I pose another question relating to the preventive work?
Yes, but please make it fast.
Yes, so I just wanted to ask, not many preventive workers have a theological background and are able to discuss religion with a client on a theological level. How do you solve this problem?
Genau, dazu kann ich was sagen. Wir sind multiprofessionell aufgestellt. Es ist nicht wichtig, Theologe zu sein, aber es ist wichtig, theologisches und kulturelles Hintergrundwissen etwas zu haben, damit man auch angemessen auf die Person eingehen kann.
Yeah, in our case, or like in our counseling centers, we are like multi-professionally displayed. There are some people with a theological background, some people with a more social work background, and we realized that for probation officers, they normally didn't go through theological studies or anything like that. But we do recognize the importance, especially in the field of religiously motivated extremism, to have like a basic understanding of some like theological questions and the cultural sensitivity, when these type of points might come up. This can be gained through training and things like that. But of course, yeah, no one is expected to go through theological studies or anything like that.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Before we get back to the Q&A, we have from Liliana from Romania. I can see that she's already there. So Liliana, will you address your question or comment, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hello.
Okay, hello, and thank you. Nice to see you, Sophie, again. For our speaker, Cuma, you mentioned the importance of connecting on a personal level with Kevin. What can you tell me in a couple of phrases or 2 minutes maybe, if Kevin were to be a part of a right-wing extremist group, how can I connect with him in such a case? And thank you.
Also war die Frage, ob er auch genauso dem Rechtsextremismus sich hätte zuwenden können. Also er war ja Islamist. Deswegen.
Ja, genau. Nee, die Frage war, wenn er Rechtsextremist gewesen wäre, genau, und wenn er also Rechtsextremist gewesen wäre, wie dann diese Nähe hätte stattfinden können, weil du hast ja beschrieben, ne, auf welche Arten und Weisen ihr irgendwie euch auf so einem Augenlevel getroffen habt.
Wertschätzung wäre wichtig gewesen, auf die Bedürfnisse einzugehen, auf das einzugehen, was ihm in erster Linie erstmal wichtig erscheint.
Yeah, the underlying things are like similar. It's like, you know, a sense of appreciation of like, okay, this is an open space where, you know, we can say and talk about everything, and then like identifying things that he likes and appreciates and that make him feel comfortable. Yeah, that might not be as straightforward as, yeah, with the example of Kevin, but the mechanisms that are at play would be similar. But I'm not sure if that like fully answers your question, Liliana.
Das ist die Methode der Lebensweltorientierung in der sozialen Arbeit, dass man sich immer an der Lebenswelt des Klienten orientiert. Das ist unsere Methodik.
So it's like from social work, the theory or the principles that we follow is it's a bit difficult to translate to English, but the life world orientation. So to orient towards, you know, the life world and reality of the client, and, you know, try to take from that what is not harmful, but what provides a sense of security. So it's probably difficult to give like a super concrete answer on like Kevin as a right-wing extremist, but I think to follow that principle in general might be helpful. And yeah, really good hearing you again, Liliana.
Und wichtig ist, dass es ein nicht konfrontativer Ansatz ist, wo der Klient auf einen heißen Stuhl gesetzt wird und beleidigt wird, provoziert wird, weil auch solche konfrontativen Ansätze gibt es. Wir haben einen nicht konfrontativen Ansatz.
Yeah, in general, we oppose confrontational approaches that, yeah, were popular like, yeah, several years ago. We work with a non-confrontational approach, no hot stool, you know, hot seat approach where, you know, the client is investigated or, you know, we would force him to do anything. That's not our approach.
Thank you. Actually, you've answered my question pretty well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We are a little bit running out of time, but I hope that you all can stay because we have one more question from Fiona, from our presenter in January, and it's related to traumatic experience that young people can have suffered. And the question is, do you find early intervention is in place and effective to prevent future criminal behavior?
Das musst du mir kurz übersetzen, das war zu schnell.
Genau, ich kann es dir gerne nochmal sagen. Also du hast vorhin, hast du dich auf traumatische Erfahrungen bezogen, ne, also du hast kurz die afghanischen Jugendlichen oder palästinensische Jugendliche erwähnt. Ich weiß nicht, ob die Person sich jetzt darauf bezieht, aber die Frage ist, ob sozusagen frühzeitige Interventionen wichtig und sinnvoll sind, um potenziell zukünftiges kriminelles Verhalten zu verhindern.
Ich würde nicht sagen frühzeitig, ich würde sagen eine angemessene Intervention. Das heißt, wenn ich meine Grenzen kenne, dass ich auch zum Beispiel einen Traumaexperten auch mal übergeben kann oder an einen Psychotherapeuten zum Beispiel.
Mm-hmm. So what Cuma said is not necessarily, you know, early intervention, but adequate intervention, even though, of course, that leaves room for interpretation. But what he said is, like, when we're speaking of trauma, then obviously, like, we need to consult with maybe a psychologist or a trauma specialist or trauma educator that can maybe, you know, we can discuss the case with at first, or we can, you know, schedule a meeting with in order to maybe get a better understanding.
Ich gebe mal ein Beispiel. Wenn jemand traumatisiert ist durch lange Bärte, dann schicke ich keinen Kollegen hin wie mich, der einen Bart trägt. Also auch Multiprofessionalität und Wissen, wen schicke ich zu welchem Fall hin, ist auch nochmal wichtig.
And what we noticed in our work that sometimes trauma that is related to visual or auditive or other triggers, can be very specific. And if it comes up at like in the process, Cuma mentioned an example of like somebody who was really traumatized by seeing long beards. Then of course he wouldn't send anyone from the team with a long beard, but then we would send somebody else. So trying to respond as precisely and as adequately to the specific needs at play and the specific trauma triggers is crucial.
Manchmal ist es auch geschlechterspezifisch. Wenn wir weibliche Klientinnen haben, dann erzählen sie auch ungern männlichen Beratern, dass sie Schwierigkeiten in der Schwangerschaft hatten oder während der Geburt ihr Kind und so weiter verloren haben, auch solche Traumata.
Yeah, so sometimes it can also be quite gender-specific needs. If we have like female clients and they experience difficulties in their pregnancy and so on and so forth, they sometimes don't feel like comfortable discussing that with like a male counselor. So we're trying to accommodate to that, but not go in with like a stereotype mindset, but try to do gender-based analysis of the needs that people have.
Thank you for answering this. Just to be sure, we have no questions left. So thank you once again, everyone, for being with us, for spending the afternoon with us. If there are no other questions, then we will shortly close this webinar. The presentation will be published on the CP website, and the recording of this webinar will be on the CP YouTube channel. As I already mentioned, you can find the first webinar on women's problem-solving core as alternative to custody already published on our YouTube, and this one will be published soon. Next session on the topic of volunteers will take place on the third Thursday of May, which is 23rd of May, and registration will open soon for it. Last but not least, when leaving this room, you will find a link to the EU survey. We would like to ask you to take a couple of minutes and to answer questions from us. All information that you need to fill in the survey, you can already find in your mailboxes. So thank you very much for being with us. Have a lovely afternoon and see you next time.